Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Lynne Shaner, talking about Journey to Everland Bay, her debut novel. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Worldshapers. This is the podcast where I talk to other authors about their latest books. My name is Edward Willett. I am myself an author of a whole bunch of books, both fiction and nonfiction. My main fiction publisher is Daw Books. I've published 12 novels with Daw. The most recent one was The Tangled Stars, which came out in 2022, an ebook and audiobook. It's a far future outer space science fiction adventure featuring an AI-uplifted talking cat who becomes a starship captain. You want to look that up. You can find my books anywhere you can find books. Just Google me or put in Edward Willett in your favorite online bookstore and you will find my books. I'm also a publisher. Shadowpaw Press is the publishing company, shadowpawpress.com if you want to check it out. And been quite active recently, Shadowpaw Press. It has a lot of titles out and a lot more to come. My most recent ones that I want to mention are by a fellow Saskatchewan author. I'm in Saskatchewan, and so is he, Arthur Slade. It's a trio of spooky stories for middle grade readers, collectively called Canadian Chills. The first one is Return of the Grudstone Ghosts. The second one is Ghost Hotel, and the third one is Invasion of the IQ Snatchers. And these wonderful covers are also by a Saskatchewan creator, Elaine M. Will, who's a Schuster Award-winning artist, graphic novelist, comics artist up in Saskatoon. So you want to check those out. They're very funny. They're from early in his career, but they're very funny books and have ghosts and aliens and all sorts of fun stuffs. Even if you're not a middle grade reader, you will enjoy Canadian Chills. The other recent one that I want to mention, The Trader's Son by the late great Canadian science fiction and fantasy author Dave Duncan. He wrote, as I said, both science fiction and fantasy. I have a new fantasy novel of his, Corridor to Nightmare, coming out in August, but this is science fiction set on a colony world where things have gone really, really, really badly. The Trader's Son. In fact, it's also a world that's in all the fauna is on the spider model, which is why there's a giant spider on the cover as well. So The Trader's Son, I recommend that one as well. And it came out concurrently with this one, my biggest recent release, which is the Downloaded by Robert J. Sawyer, Hugo and Nebula Award-winning author, Canada's best-known science fiction author and one of the best-known science fiction authors in the world. It started life as an Audible audiobook original with Brendan Fraser in the cast, and then I got the print rights, and here's the print book. So look for this one as well, The Downloaded by Robert J. Sawyer. And then the other one I want to mention, which ties in directly to this podcast, is Shapers of Worlds, Volume 4. Again, you can find this wherever you like to buy your books. It has authors who were guests on this podcast, and it's the fourth one of these that I've kickstarted, and I just kickstarted number 5 back in April, and I'm collecting stories now and working on all of that sort of thing related to the Kickstarter. I'm a little slower this year because of all the publishing stuff, but I'll get there if you're one of the backers. Don't worry. Shapers of Worlds Volume 5 should go out to backers by the end of the year, and then it will go out to the public early next year. But for now, this one is available. It has Sherry Lynn Kenyon, Navi Tidhar, Jean-Louis Trudel, Michael Brent Collings, David Boop, and a bunch of other great authors, including me. So look for Shapers of Worlds Volume 4 from Shadowpaw Press. All right. Now, let's get on to this episode's guest. We will be talking to a debut novelist today, Lynne Shaner. And I'll just put on my glasses so I can read her bio. Lynne Shaner has been captivated by fantasy, myth, and fairy tale since childhood when her mother first read Charlotte's Web and The Wind in the Willows to her. She lives in Wisconsin, close enough to Lake Michigan to walk to the shoreline every day. Shelves overflying with books line her home, and there is always a knitting project on her needles. Lynne lives with her husband and Merlin, her small, adorable pup. When not writing, she can be found reading and knitting in her garden where she grows herbs, flowers, and I love this, and story ideas. So, where do you get your ideas? Well, I grow them in my garden, of course, doesn't everyone? Her work has appeared in various literary magazines. She holds a master's degree in creative writing fiction from Johns Hopkins. And as I said, this is her debut novel, Journey to Everland Bay. So let's talk to Lynne now. So Lynne, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Great. I usually start these things by, looking for some sort of connection. This is a really weird one, but I noticed in your bio that you live close enough to Lake Michigan to go down to the shoreline, and I live close enough to Wascana Lake to go down to the shoreline. Now, Wascana Lake is 5 kilometers around. So it's not quite the size. I walk around it in about 45 minutes. So it's not quite
Oh
the
my
size
goodness.
of Lake Michigan, but still we both live close to a lake. So there you go. There's a connection.
Yes, absolutely.
So
Always for
let's
good likes.
yeah. So let's start with as I being a musical theater guy, I always think of Sound of Music. Let's start at the very beginning. Let's start
I'm
with
very excited to start.
exactly do re mi, or in your case ABC. So tell me about your where you were born, where you grew up, and how you got interested in. You probably started as a reader. Most of us do. Reading, writing, and maybe arithmetic. I don't know.
Yes, thank you. Like so many of us, I started as a little one, reading and falling in love with books, falling in love with stories. And I was fortunate to have the kind of parent and mother who also loved those things. So she read to us every night, as I recall it, when I was a little girl. And my sister and I would be curled up in bed, and she would read out of whatever chapter book was next, and or we were in the middle of. And from there, of course, I fell in love with stories and books. And my very exciting Christmas gifts were always books. That was what was always on my list. And one thing led to another. And when you read so much, one can't help but start writing. And so I started writing from the time I was really little.
Did you have favorite kinds of books, or were you pretty omnivorous in what you like to
I
read?
was pretty omnivorous and cliched. I read Black Beauty, and I read all the mysteries, Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden, and I read the Boxcar Kids, and I read, Little House on the Prairie, and all of the books that were around at that time for children our age and kids our age. I loved all of the animal books, all the Terhune books, Lad, a Dog, and all the horse books, Misty of Chincoteague, and was very excited when I moved out to the East Coast eventually and was able to see Chincoteague and Assateague Islands. And so it
I
went
remember
from
those books. I remember those as
Yes,
well. I read a lot of horse books and dog
yes.
books and all that kind of thing.
And then I fell in love with the all of the mythology and fantasy and Mort Arthur, Mallory, the Arthurian fables, and went off in that direction for a lifetime. I enjoyed those.
You said you started writing young. How young?
I think I was little. Like I remember I have an image in my mind's eye. It was personally, I illustrated by the author as well, of the loneliest Christmas tree. And it was illustrated in crayon on construction paper. The binding was a construction paper binding. So I must have been about 5 or 6 when but that was probably my debut.
And then as you grew older, I presume you wrote longer and more complex
Yes,
tales.
about the loneliest Christmas tree, although I'm sure it one day could be a bestseller. Yes, I really did enjoy writing and reading, and I wrote longer and was one of those kids, probably like you, who was encouraged by teachers and started writing, really terrible poetry in my teens, and really pretty awful short stories back then. But I began to get a sense of the joy of it and was encouraged enormously by teachers and by my mother. And then my first 2 out of 3 of my degrees were in creative writing and writing. So
I presume then you were sharing your writing with people along that time in there. I always
I
ask that
was in
question.
my undergraduate days when I did my back then. It was a while back, so I was University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and they didn't call it creative writing back then. They called it rhetoric, and so I had rhetoric, which was writing, and I was sharing it in workshops, but also with the teachers. The students were not necessarily the most helpful critique leaders, but the teachers often were, and so I really valued their feedback. And then I went on to my work in the world, which was in writing and editing in the fine arts world, in the museum world, and kept poking away at it. But I was never one of those people who could write all night long, nights and weekends, and then go to work during the day. I did that for my second degree, for my master's from Hopkins in creative writing fiction. So I would write at night and go to work during the day and put together a collection of short stories, some of which were published. And then life got in the way for many years, and it took a while to get back to being able to really spend time on my own writing.
So you did have some publication in the shorter fiction.
I did. I had right off the bat, right when I finished the master's, I had a piece published, and I had also had quite a bit of nonfiction published. And then in like 2016, I had another piece published, and that felt really good. And I had some poetry published, and won a little award, and that felt really good. And then I was gathering steam under this book, and finally was able to put it all together. So,
well, let's talk about Journey to Everland Bay. Okay, this is the question first, before I ask the question you're not supposed to ask, how about a quick synopsis of this without giving away anything you don't want to give away?
Yes. Young, unconventional mage-in-training Jemma Avalon is rocketed from her work in the museum world of Washington, D.C., summoned to protect and help her ancestral homeland, which is under siege from powerful dark arts mages who threaten everything important to her. And along the way, she discovers her truest self and her deepest strengths.
It sounds like there's a dog adding a few.
Yes, I'm very sorry about that. My little overly excited miniature schnauzer is very concerned about something outside. So
well,
I apologize.
The last interview I did, my cat suddenly made an appearance in the middle of it with his tail going across.
I like the Zoom cat appearances with the tail.
He's never done it before until that time, and then all of a sudden there he was, and so it happens. Anyway, so that's interesting. Now, this is the question you're not supposed to ask: is where do you get your ideas? So where did this come from? Obviously, you've worked in the museum world, so I presume that.
I did, and I have been enjoying fantasy and fairy tales and the Celtic otherworld tradition for many years. And I thought about what about a person who is a little unconventional, somebody who didn't have the equivalent of some Harvard magical school, but for someone for whom life was a little more difficult. Jemma had a lot of challenges. And so my ideas come from my own life and from the lives of friends around me. I did work in the museum world for many years. And so there are some museum scenes in there that are drawn from that time and that life. And I think too, once you get started in writing stories, there are so many places from which we can get ideas. There are about 3, 4, 5 books up here that are just waiting for time and for time and attention of my keyboard hand so that I can get them down. And it comes out of the ether, out of my own concerns and excitements and things I want to explore. And then the characters themselves seem to knock on the door and want to come in.
Now, this podcast began by focusing pretty strictly on the process, and I still like to talk about the process, even though it's talking more about new releases these days. So what is your process for creating a novel? Are you a big outliner? Did you do a lot of preliminary work before you began writing scenes, or did you have a general idea and then launch into it?
This is probably the least satisfying explanation, but it's a little bit of both. So I had a pretty clear idea, And I do sort of bullet point outlines and then start in. And so it's sort of like holding the flashlight. I do bullet point outline, sometimes a sentency outline, and then go forward, and then go as far as I can, and then step back, and go a little further and step back. I often will know the arc, the kind of the beginning. The middle is always a horrible mess, and kind of where I want to end up. And then the book surprises me. So I get in and then need to steer the car and turn it around, and all those metaphors. This one I got through a draft and was working on the revision. And halfway through, somewhere in the middle of the revision, I realized that I needed to rewrite about half the book. And so that was a daunting moment. And I needed to take the book in another direction. So sometimes the revision process itself helps me or hinders me and creates new opportunities and challenges as I need to go forward into the rest of the book. Yeah. So I have a very clear schedule. I am I treat this as a job. And so I have office hours, and I have it on my calendar, on my electronic calendar. I do keep an electronic calendar these days. And so those hours are blocked out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every morning. And I give myself permission for throughout the day. Those are my big work days. And then some of Thursday morning and some of Friday morning as necessary. So those are times that I'm here. This is my office. It's a dedicated space. Nothing else happens here. This is my writing office. So,
are you a fast writer when you are actually writing words?
I would like to be a fast writer. I am envious of fast writers, and I write. I am a pretty quick reviser. I'm a slow drafter. So I am trying to move the needle on that, but it's hard for me to get the first pages together. So
now you talked about the characters knocking to be let in. So did you have the plot, or the characters came first, or do they kind of emerge together as you think about it?
These, in this book, they sort of arose together. I had the first draft. I did the first draft in 2014, and I gave myself the challenge to use the structure of NaNoWriMo in a different month, because I couldn't do it in November of that year, to really get a good messy draft down. And so I had an idea that basically is somewhat similar to this idea, and I put it down, and I would pause. I knew I could see the character before I knew their name, generally. So I could see the main character here is Jemma, and I could see her, and I knew she needed a name. And so I asked her about that, and I asked her parents about that, and came to the name Jemma. And that was sort of the way with each of the characters. Some just came. When I would see them with their names were just there. So it was a bit of a mix.
One of the interesting things about it from the description, it seems to be a version of our world. I mean, it's Washington, D.C., and yet at the same time, magic is apparently known about, although restricted. Is that what I'm taking from your synopsis?
That's true. And this is 3 worlds, really. There's the first part of the book exists in an alternate Washington, D.C., where it's very much like the Washington, D.C. that you would walk down the street and see the same places, with some of them with different names. But it borrows from the Celtic otherworld tradition, which says that magic and our world are intermixed and woven together, so that if you go around the corner, a forest may open up and it is a magical land, or the very land itself that you're walking through may be imbued with magic. And in that world, which is a part of what I call veranda lands, it is a world in which magic has been, is very discouraged and is on the way to being outlawed. And in the world of Everland Bay, where Jemma travels and from where her family is and where she was as a little girl, is the world based on the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes area. And they call it the Great Waters area in Everland Bay. And so that's the model for this world. But again, it is an other world that borrows the landscape from the world in which we are, but it's a land of magic and enchantment and a land that is free of patriarchy. So there are different tenets and different truths about this world.
So that sounds like it's an opportunity to bounce ideas against each other of different ways of looking at the world and what that would mean. Is there a central theme in your mind
regarding the world or the story?
The story. I mean, I'm picking. You have the different worlds. You have the characters moving among the
Mm-hmm.
worlds. Is there? I mean, okay. I always think of this because I had wrote a book called The City Board. I was 2/3 of the way through it when I suddenly realized what it was about.
Oh,
So I
yes.
kind of discovered what I was really writing about and I'm wondering if there's something similar happening here as you have.
Well, there is to some extent, and that the sense of what happens if we were living in a world in which people were freer to become their best selves, and what happens if we're living in a world in which we're really working together toward the good, as cliched and corny as that sounds. What would be the case? What would that world look like? What are the possibilities? What would our lives be like, especially the lives of really women and men, when we are free of patriarchy? What if that isn't the ground and truth of our existence, but rather something that does not exist? What are the freedoms that would exist? And so I am able to explore some of those things. I think that when you're working in the world of speculative fiction, you get to choose which tenets you want to set aside and which things you want to explore. And the idea of coming together to create a better world, the idea of reworking things in such a way that people are given freedom to become their truest and best selves, and the notion that really we all have access to what I like to call everyday magic, which is the magic of friendship, the magic of a smile, the magic of going on a walk down to the shores of Lake Michigan.
So is it the freedom to explore that kind of alternate reality that drew you to write fantasy, as opposed to you could have written a story just set in the museum world of Washington, D.C., and that would be interesting too. So.
Yes, and maybe one day that story will exist. And what I was having a lot of fun with was the notion of magical creatures and inherent magic, and just a lot of sparkle and fun and a sense of entertainment that can come with speculative fiction, with fantasy. There are things that Jemma is able to do that would just not happen in the real world at all. And there's also a givenness about generally women are in charge in this world, and that's not a given in our world. And it gives some possibilities that and some freedom that don't exist in our real world. So it is fun. It's fun to think about. There will be eventually a book that is more magical realism and less full fantasy, and it moves more toward a world that is similar to our own. So it's fun to explore all these different possibilities.
Once you had a draft, what did your revision process look like? You talked about your
I did everything wrong. I had the first truly messy draft, and I put it in a box, and then life blew up, as life is capable of doing. So there were medical emergencies, people were dying, we moved across the country. So many different sort of non-fantastical impediments to working on the book further happened. And it took many years. And once I was through all of that, I was having a coffee with a friend and explaining that I had this really, truly horrible manuscript. And I was thinking about just giving up on the whole project. And she said, "Oh, no, let me tell you about my story." And she had a similar story. And she was 7 or 8 books into a wonderful thriller series and is very successful published author, Patricia Skalka. And that gave me a spark of hope. And so I sat down and I began the revision process. And I worked with a writing studio here in the Milwaukee area called All Writers. It's a wonderful place to get going. And I was able to put myself on a schedule. And that was where my revision began. And it was also the very beginning of COVID. And so I was able to shut all the doors to the real world and come into this world and the world of Everland Bay.
Do you have what are usually called beta readers, people that you share the work with and get feedback during the revision process?
Yes, the first beta readers for this book were the once a month Saturday morning novel workshop. I've got that probably twisted around at All Writers. And we did up to 20 pages a month, and we shared them with each other and then went on. And so those were my first beta readers. And at some point when I was further into revisions and needing more one-on-one work, I began working with another beta reader coach with whom I'm still working. So Carrie Newberry, who's a wonderful fantasy author herself. So
it's one thing to have a finished and revised manuscript. It's another to have a published book. So there's a step in there. When you went from I have a book to I have a published book. So what was your publication
my
journey?
Publishing story was that I put together I worked for, you know how this goes. I worked for it felt like 100 years on my query letter, my synopsis. I had a 1-page synopsis, a 3-page synopsis, a 5-page synopsis, a bio, 100 or a 200-word synopsis. I had a query letter. I did all of that, revision through all of those things. So I worked very hard for a few months to get those sort of building blocks toward the pitch in place. And I went to the Chicago Writing Association Writers Retreat. They do it once a year, somewhere in March usually. And I had some pitch sessions with publishers and with agents. I got really good feedback. And unfortunately, one of the agents said that this sounded really great and he'd like to see some pages, but he wouldn't be able to read anything for at least a year. Mm-hmm. And I found that discouraging. So I left there, but very excited. I got a lot of requests, and that was a good validation. And then I put together a spreadsheet. And at that point, there was a lot of encouragement in my world to approach publishers directly. And so I decided to go that route. And I was very fortunate that a traditional publisher who is small was very encouraging and decided to. My most exciting, I think, email ever was the one whose subject line read contract offer. Yeah. So I went with a small press. It was a good path for me. It is a good path for me. This is a traditional publisher, and they're small. So I was able to approach them directly.
Now, there's usually another editing pass once it's in the hands of the publisher. So what did that look like for you?
So it's Black Rose Writing is the publisher that I'm working with. And so there's an editing pass. They ask that you make sure that they ask that you please go through it one more time before you send it. And then they have an editing pass, and they have an editing software pass, and they have their publisher gives it an eyeball. And so I had all of those marked comments on the manuscript that came back to me. And I had to work through every single one, from tiny details like punctuation to larger questions and concerns that they flagged or wanted to look at again. And that was my process.
And I kind of, yeah, it's annoying sometimes when an editor comes back and says, you didn't do this well enough, or you need to read. But I actually kind of enjoy the rewriting process almost more than I enjoy the writing process. And I think you said something similar, that you're a fast rewriter and a slow writer, but do you enjoy the revision process?
I am grateful.
Something happened there. I lost
Yes.
lost you for a second.
Yes. The screen went blank, so I don't know what happened.
So do you enjoy the revising process?
I do, with qualifications. Revision is easier than first pages. So the revising process is because you have something to work with. I was a professional editor and writer in Washington all those years. And so I always said to my authors, just get it down. I can help. So the revision process is always easier. Even now I'm revising another book, and I have something there to work with. There's something there to shape. So, but then one of the hard things, and you've probably experienced this as well in your many books, is that there's so many revisions. I need to do so many revisions before I feel that it's ready. That's on this side of the desk before it goes to the publisher.
I always like when someone will ask me about a book, and it's well, you must be excited. It's out. Yeah, but I've read it so many times. I'm not reading it again just because I haven't.
Exactly.
So when did the book come out?
The book came out at the end of April.
And have you been pleased with the response?
I have been. I'm very, very grateful. People are very enthusiastic, and people are enjoying it. And sometimes people who are reading it will stop me and say, "Oh, I loved it when she did this and this and this," and "Oh, I loved seeing that scene." So it's been this is my very first novel. So this is an very exciting summer.
Yeah, as I'm sure you experienced, when you get that box of books and you see it as a real book for the first time, that's a special moment.
It's a remarkable moment. It really is. Here's the book.
It's a lovely cover too.
So thank you. They did a wonderful job, and it really is an amazing moment when you open that box of books, and there it is in 3 dimensions, this thing that's just been in manuscript and in binders and in your head for so many years.
And what are you working on now?
I am working on the second book in this series. And so I'm in revision on that. And then I have a larger project out here, a different sort of trajectory that will be a standalone. So I have too many ideas and too few hours for all of what's next.
A very common complaint.
Mm-hmm.
And where can people keep up with you online and find out about your writing?
People can find me, my website, lynneshaner.com, and that's LYNNESHANER.com. Don't forget the E.
Right there on the screen.
You got that on the screen. Yes, that's me, lynneshaner.com. And then I'm on Threads at the little mark, lynn.shaner. And I'm on Facebook, L. Shaner Author, also just Lynne Shaner. And you can find me in all those places.
You're like me. Everybody says you should have the same handle on everything, and I think every one of mine is different somehow. So.
Yeah.
Well, Lynne, thanks so much for being on the Worldshapers. I enjoyed the chat and finding out about the book, and I hope you enjoyed the chat as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's been delightful.
And best of luck with the current one and the next one.
Thank you so much. And the same to you with all of your many projects that are in the works.
Yeah, thanks.
Too
Like you said, too many ideas
many
and
ideas, too
not
few
enough
hours.
time. So
Yeah.
thanks so much.
Thank you. You take care.
And thanks again to Lynne for being such a wonderful guest. I certainly enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you did as well. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. Just the usual housekeeping things to remind you of that you can find The Worldshapers at theworldshapers.com. Every episode has its own page with links to social media and all that sort of thing. And, artwork for the book and things like that. So check that out, theworldshapers.com. You can also find The Worldshapers on Facebook at The Worldshapers and on Twitter, X, at The Worldshapers. You can find me personally in a number of places, including on X at eWillet, 2 T's on Willet, obviously. Oh, should nod that direction. You can find me on Facebook at edward.willet. You can find me on Instagram at edwardwilletauthor, and from there to Threads. I'm on Blue Sky as, I guess, Edward Willett. I don't know that one very well. What have I forgotten? Facebook, Edward.Willett. Yeah, well, that covers the main ones, I guess. Oh, and YouTube. You may very well be watching this on my YouTube channel, but youtube.com/Edward Willett takes you there. And among other things, I walk around my home city of Regina several times a week, and I live stream it. So it's kind of like a live vlog, I guess, with the view of Regina, Saskatchewan, should you be interested. So check that out as well. My publishing company, Shadowpaw Press, is at shadowpawpress.com. Oh, that's what I forgot. edwardwillet.com is my website. Shadowpawpress.com. You can find it on X at Shadowpaw Press and on Facebook at Shadowpaw Press. And I think that covers the highlights. So again, thanks for being with me today. I have lots more great guests lined up, and I hope to continue doing this for quite some time. So please come back next time as I continue to talk to authors about their latest books. That's it for this episode. Bye for now.